Hello and welcome to the 2021 Housing Assembly. I'm Karen Percy and I will be your MC for today's program. I'm coming to you from the traditional lands of the Bunurong and the Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. As we gather here from all over Australia, please feel free to tell us which First Nations land you are joining us from. Write it in the chat when you get a chance. To begin today's program, I would like to welcome Wurundjeri elder Uncle Tony Garvey, who is here to perform the Welcome to Country under his ancestors' land. This will then be followed by a Jiri Jiri dance performance. Over to you, Uncle Tony.
Thank you very much, Erin, for that warm welcome. First of all, I'd just like to start off with saying Wamijika or Warranjika to everyone. So in the Wurundjeri language, it means welcome. So welcome to all Indigenous and non-Indigenous people here today. I'd also just like to say I'm very proud and honoured to be here representing my people, the forgotten people, the Wurundjeri Wurrung people. The Wurundjeri Wurrung people are also a part of the Kulin Nation. So Kulin means man. In the Kulin Nation, there were 5 language groups. There was the Wadawurrung to the west, the Coorong, who were the westerly neighbours to the Wadawurrung, Tanarong to the northeast, Bunurong to the southwest, and the Wurrung of the Wurundjeri territory that you're standing on here today. The Wurundjeri lies within the cities of Melbourne. It extends from the mountains of the Great Dividing Range, south to the Yarra River, west to the Werribee River, and east to Mount Baw. The Wurundjeri people, they have a social totem. It is Bunjil the eagle. Bunjil represents spiritual powers throughout many parts of Australia. Bunjil taught all the laws about life, behaviour and ceremonies to make sure that our culture would continue for all walks of life throughout Australia. Bunjil is referred to as the creator of mankind. Bunjil created great people from the land, and that is why we call the land our mother or the mother of creation. Never can the land be taken away. The land will always belong to Aboriginal people. We are part of the land and the land is part of us. Our story is similar to yours. Yours is by your chosen faith, ours is by the dream time. We both have creators and beliefs, and ours is Bunjil. It is a traditional custom of the Australian Aboriginal communities to give permission for people to enter their land. And you have now joined with me to honour the spirits of my ancestors, past, present and merging, who have nurtured this land for over 60,000 years. And we as the custodians of the land offer you a heartily welcome to the land and hope that together as citizens of this beautiful country, we can build, develop and unite stronger nations for all people. Finally, I'd just like to close in my Wurrung language. Wamijika, Wandoon, Wurundjeri, Balak, Yemen, Kumbibik, which means you're most welcome to the lands of the Wurundjeri people. Thank you very much for having me here today. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, the Jiri Dance Group and all women's Wurundjeri Dance Group as well. That terrific welcome, very warm welcome to country from Wurundjeri Elder Uncle Tony Garvey. It's so wonderful to hear and learn from the traditional custodians of Naarm. So good morning to you all. Thank you so much for joining us today. Housing Assembly 2021, Creating Socially Valuable Housing, is presented by the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning in collaboration with the Hallmark Research Initiative for Affordable Housing at the University of Melbourne. Over the next 3 days, we'll be showcasing a diverse range of topics, all centred around the key idea, housing that is good and does good. We'll do a little bit of housekeeping to begin with. We understand that a lot of you may have commitments over the coming days, which means you may not be able to watch live, but you may need to be able to see a session after it's conducted. And all sessions are being recorded and will be available after the live broadcast. So you will be able to rewatch at a later stage. How good is a catch-up service, hey? We've definitely got you covered there. We encourage audience participation as part of the event as well. So please do share your thoughts with us. And to do that, there are a couple of options. You can leave a comment or ask a question, and to the right of your screen you'll see the chat function, and then below that is the question function. We encourage you to chat and share resources throughout each session. And where there is a Q&A, please feel free to put down your questions in the question tab and vote for the questions you'd like to have answered by clicking the heart against that question. I'm hoping there's going to be a whole lot of love in the room today as you click away hearting those questions. And of course, we want the messages within this forum to be shared to the world. So we'd also like you to be live posting on your favourite social media platform, be it Twitter, LinkedIn or Instagram. And be sure to use the hashtags, hashtag affordable housing, hashtag housing assembly 2021, hashtag social value of housing. And these hashtags will also be posted in the chat. Now, we've got this whiz-bang technology today that we're using throughout the conference. Don't worry if you're not the savviest when it comes to tech, you will be able to take part with the help of our fabulous technology helpers. We want you to have the best experience that you can. So if you get a chance, read through the help desk that's located on the left-hand side of your screen in the virtual lobby. And if you do need to contact our wonderful JT Production Management Events team or tech support, navigate to your inbox at the top of your screen and search Event Support. That'll get you to the instant chat. So there you go. There's the housekeeping for now. And I would like now to hand over to Alan Pert, the Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning at the University of Melbourne. Over to you, Alan.
Oh, thank you, Karen, for an incredible introduction and a huge welcome to the eagerly anticipated launch of the Housing Assembly 2021. And as Karen mentioned, my name is Professor Alan Pert. I'm Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning, but I'm also Chair of the Hallmark Research Initiative for Affordable Housing. And along with my colleague, Dr. Kate Rayner, we have co-curated the Housing Assembly 2021. And a huge thank you also to Uncle Tony Garvey, Wurundjeri Elder, and Jiri Dance Performance for your beautiful welcome to country. And I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which this event is taking place, which may be multiple lands given the location of all of you listening in today. I'm currently speaking from Wurundjeri land on the banks of the Birrarung, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present. I also acknowledge and respect that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people had and still have laws that predate colonisation. We join in their responsibility to care for country as built environment and design experts, and thank the traditional owners for sharing their knowledge. Now, after months of planning, and particularly with so much uncertainty over the impact of COVID, we're all delighted and slightly relieved to be welcoming everyone to what is a packed few days of keynotes, live panel sessions, case study presentations, but importantly, local context discussions that explore what it means to create socially valuable housing. At the outset, I want to thank each and every one of you who has helped to organise, to plan, or to present as part of the 3 days symposium, it has been a huge undertaking. I won't have the time to name each and every one of you on the team responsible, but just as it takes a community to organise a child, to raise a child, it takes a very special group of dedicated people to organise an event with 62 speakers, 23 sessions, 7 keynotes, but importantly, across 7 time zones. I also want to thank the faculty, the university, and our partners, including Parla, MPavilion, EBA Melbourne, and House and All Australians, for supporting what we believe is a discussion dedicated to one of society's most pressing issues, affordable housing. Now, the Housing Assembly allows us to come together across disciplinary boundaries. Importantly, it recognises the complexity of the housing system, not only here in Australia, but across the globe. And as world leaders gather in Glasgow for COP26 over the coming days, I think it is only fitting that we are gathering here in Melbourne to discuss the importance of access to affordable, high-quality housing for all. An issue, I think, cannot be overstated. We're also taking full advantage of our newfound connectivity to hear from a range of housing protagonists across the 3 days, from London to Los Angeles, from Copenhagen to Berlin, from Edinburgh to Girona, from Singapore to Toronto, and from New York to Vienna. We will explore the international context. But importantly, we'll also attempt to translate this international perspective into a local context with some of Australia's most knowledgeable housing researchers, practitioners and policymakers sharing their thoughts across the 3 days. We envisage that the Housing Assembly will evolve as an annual event. As a coalition of researchers from universities and key industry advisors, we feel that the Housing Assembly offers a unique opportunity for Melbourne to establish itself as an international centre for pure and applied research in the fields of city planning and precinct development, with a particular focus on housing. We have as such established the Housing Assembly to develop a deep understanding of the challenges ahead. We want to connect citizens to research and support government in the future development of the city and our suburbs. We feel that we can create metropolitan solutions with impact if the universities can begin to collaborate together and with government. And we thank Homes Victoria, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and the Office for the Victorian Government Architect for their continued support for this initiative. Whilst insecure housing is an ongoing problem for many cities around the world, including here in Melbourne, the pandemic has only further spotlighted the integral role housing plays with regard to the physical and mental health, and the importance of creating accessible housing that is also beneficial to the broader community and to the environment. Collaboration across industries and across disciplines is key to finding comprehensive solutions to the complex issues facing our housing industry and ensuring new housing stock is the absolute best that it can be. That's why it is so important to gather as we are today, tomorrow, and on Friday. One day would simply not be enough to do justice to the issues at hand. The variety of expertise offered by our speaker lineup reflects the richness and diversity of the work being done in the housing sphere. In bringing together the expertise of speakers and attendees alike, this symposium not only acknowledges the complexity of housing systems and their role in supporting or inhibiting sustainability, well-being and economic stability, but it also creates a platform to connect researchers, government, industry and community organisations in order to collectively drive innovation and enduring positive change. Finally, we hope the Housing Assembly can be used not as an endpoint, but instead as a live and important ongoing project, asking more questions, provoking more thoughts, and seeking your responses to the housing challenge. Importantly, after 50 years of perceived inaction in Victoria, we need to reframe priorities across the board in funding, in procurement, in design and delivery of social and affordable housing. Finally, it appears to be getting the urgent attention it deserves. Minister Wynn's announcement about the $5.3 billion big housing build last year is an incredible opportunity to implement a progressive social agenda for housing that redefines housing from a consumer product to an important public infrastructure, but importantly with a human touch. And 12 months on from this announcement, and who better to kick off the symposium than our very first speaker, Ben Rimmer, the Chief Executive Officer of Homes Victoria, with oversight of the 10-year housing strategy. So it's a huge honour to be able to introduce Ben, who rejoined the Victorian Public Service as the Director of Housing in December 2019, after 12 years in senior leadership positions with the Australian Government and with the City of Melbourne, where he was CEO. As the Director of Housing and the CEO for Homes Victoria, Ben leads the largest social and affordable housing investment and reform agenda in Victorian history. In April 2020, Ben was appointed Associate Secretary of the then Department of Health and Human Services, a role created to support the department's COVID-19 response. Ben has retained this position and now oversees executive and legal services in this capacity alongside his responsibilities for Homes Victoria. And in the Victorian Department of Premier and Cabinet and the Australian Government Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Ben led work on social policy, Commonwealth state reform and service delivery. He then spent time in operational leadership and change management as Associate Secretary of the Commonwealth Department of Human Services. Through his work with the City of Melbourne, Ben has significant experience in urban renewal, property development, planning, and importantly, homelessness. A huge welcome, Ben Rimmer, to the House and Assembly 2021.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Alan, for that warm welcome. And it's great to be with you this morning from Wurundjeri country. Could we bring the slides up, please? And on the next slide. So we just saw that wonderful video of Wurundjeri country, and I'd like to thank Uncle Tony for his warm welcome to country, and also pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I'm joining you from Wurundjeri country as well, and I would like to acknowledge the continuing connection between Aboriginal Victorians and the land that we're all joining from, or indeed other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from around Australia. And I'd also like to pay a particular acknowledgement, pay particular respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who work in the housing and homelessness sector. Here in Victoria, we know that Aboriginal Victorians are massively overrepresented in the need for social and affordable housing and in our homelessness system. And so we know that creating a culturally safe environment with self-determination at its core is absolutely central to everything that we do. Next slide, thanks. It's awesome to join you today, and what a wonderful event this is. I'm really excited about it. There are names on the program that I've looked up to for many, many years. And I think it's great to have this kind of debate and engagement about such an important issue. My own view is that the more engagement that we have, the more discussion, debate, challenge, consideration about these critical issues, the better. And there is this enormous need for us to improve the way we work on housing, particularly for the affordable and social housing of the housing market. And I particularly value the diversity of perspectives that are represented in this program. We've got economists, we've got designers, we've got social scientists, we've got a whole range of people, both from Australia, from Victoria, from Melbourne, from Victoria, from Australia, from overseas. And it's great to get that different sense of context and perspective, the alternative perspectives that you get from different jurisdictions and different contexts on these issues. And you get to see how Australian policy fits into the wider global landscape. And my role, together with Alan, is to help set the context for this conversation by situating it a little bit in Victoria, a little bit in Melbourne, and by giving a bit of insight into the incredibly exciting transformation that's underway in Victorian government policy settings regarding social and affordable housing. So this slide is all about some things that probably most people on this call have a good appreciation of. We all know the importance of housing as a critical foundation. Housing can itself be transformative. It can enable participation and inclusion in social and economic life. It can create the foundation for which people can live through really difficult circumstances in their lives, whether that be ill health or family violence, relationship breakdown, all kinds of other challenges are much easier to address with the stability of housing behind people and that sense of community and engagement. It's also a fundamental part of economic productivity. And from where I come from, the need for rejuvenating and encouraging that more economic narrative about the importance of housing is absolutely central. Not because the social aspects of housing supply are not important and are not well known, but because we need to add the economic narrative into our story. The narrative about employment participation, the narrative about economic inclusion, the narrative about successful societies, successful communities are more likely to be economically successful, and also the narrative about the jobs and construction activity and employment activity that is created by effective government participation in the housing market. So we need to shift away from a purely welfare lens in relation to social housing and see social and affordable housing as critical enablers of both economic and social inclusion and participation. Housing is actually essential infrastructure in just as much, in just as strong a way as perhaps renewable energy generation is, or new train stations. And we need to think of it as essential infrastructure for our community with public value. We've been having a little bit of a debate in Victoria lately about whether there is public value from social housing and affordable housing. And I was a bit surprised by this, to be honest. I didn't think we needed to have that particular debate. But there is a perspective that says that there is only private value from people that are housed in the delivery of social and affordable housing, which I think is a little bit limited, and we need to move beyond. Next slide, thanks. There are, in the Victorian context, there are massive pressures across our housing system right at the moment. Just to give a couple of examples of this, there are at least 53,000 households who have applied for social housing and are on a waiting list, and around 30,000 of those households are priority applicants. And to be frank, it's pretty challenging to become a priority applicant. That means you are in real housing need. In addition, there are about 9,000 existing tenants of public and community housing who want to move, usually because they want to downsize, and because of the relative infrequency of vacancies and because of the stock in the housing system, there are few options for people to downsize. Also, many essential workers, and those essential workers that we've heard so much about during COVID, both the nurses, the hospital orderlies, the aged care and disability workers, the supermarket workers, the supply chain workers, all of that kind of essential workforce is really under intense housing affordability stress at the moment. So to give just one example of this, I've picked a local government area of Stonington. So in the last 12 months, there were 9,326 new rental properties advertised in the local government area of Stonington. And while Stonington has some very well-off areas, it also has a pretty diverse community, and it has some parts of the council area that are more affordable in general. But of those 9,300 new rental advertisements, only 0.8% were affordable. In real terms, what that means is that an entire year in that local government area, 70 new rental listings came up that were affordable. In addition to that, we've got significant challenges coming down the path around population growth. Yes, COVID has changed the dynamic about that a little bit for a couple of years, but I think all of our predictions and expectations are that Australia and Victoria will rapidly resume significant population growth. That affordable issue that I talked about, sure, it's most extreme perhaps in some parts of inner Melbourne, but increasingly it's right across Victoria, and increasingly in particular, we've seen real housing market challenges in regional Victoria. The COVID-19 population impacts have meant that there is very significant economic disruption in the housing markets in regional Victoria. There are parts of regional Victoria right at the moment where it's almost impossible to buy a house for love or money. There are parts of regional Victoria where rental prices have doubled in the past 18 months. There are very significant challenges emerging, and that has an impact for everyone in the community, but it also means some really core aspects of society are breaking down a little bit. You know, the hospital that can't employ a nurse because they don't have any housing in their local community that a nurse can afford, or that's even vacant, to be honest. So there are real challenges also coming out of COVID-19. And you can see that in the waiting list. The waiting list for social housing in Victoria has grown by about 10,000 applicants over the past 18 months. And that's really driven not by changes in supply of social housing, but really by increased demand as some people have gone through extreme financial pressure over the last period. Next slide, thanks. One aspect of the Victorian government's agenda at the moment is working towards a 10-year strategy for social and affordable housing. And we went out and we talked to a whole heap of stakeholders and the community itself about what they wanted from the housing system. And some of these things are relatively self-explanatory, but there was a strong emphasis on the need for wraparound services to sustain people in their housing. And really, this is the next incarnation of the Housing First agenda. Yes, it's important to have the physical infrastructure, and I'll talk more about the really exciting work we're doing in construction and development. But there are many people in our community who need sustainable wraparound support services to help people live in place, to live well in place, to age well in place. And that ranges from aged care in the home or disability home care, but it also includes supports for people perhaps living with a mental illness challenge, or an alcohol and other drugs challenge, or other services that are necessary as well. We need housing to be accessible, sustainable, obviously. We need it to be well suited to demand. We need it to be well located, close to amenities. And close to amenities doesn't just mean close to a place where you can buy milk. Close to amenities is really talking about that integration into the social and economic fabric of the community. And core to all of this is, I guess, what we're learning from, in particular, the mental health world, is the importance of lived experience perspectives. Really doing the co-design, embedding client and consumer voices in the design of services, and really moving away from perhaps embedding voices in design that we do into co-design and actually into resident and tenant empowerment. And I'll talk more about that in a little while. Next slide, thanks. So at the core of all of this, from a Victorian perspective, is the $5.3 billion big housing build. To put the big housing build in context, it's the largest single investment in social and affordable housing. We say in Victoria's history, but actually the truth is it's in Australia's history, the largest investment by any government. It's actually larger than the Kevin Rudd era nation building housing package. It's creating over 12,000 new homes, an average of 10,000 jobs a year over 4 years. And it comes on top of a steady increase in activity over this term and the last term of government, where there is now a construction and development pipeline for housing, which is in excess of $7 billion worth of construction activity. We have $2 billion under contract right now today with builders and developers right across Victoria. We're building about 6,300 new homes right now and employing about 18,500 people. Now, most of that housing is social housing, and obviously that's an area with extremely critical needs, but not all of it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the discussion. Some of it is affordable, some of it is specialist disability accommodation, some of it is private market housing that we're either facilitating or supporting or encouraging in and around developments that we're doing to build high quality integrated communities. Now, alongside that construction growth and delivery agenda, there's also the policy reform agenda. I've talked about the 10-year strategy for Victoria's social and affordable housing system, and the objective of that is really to try and establish a shared vision of where social and affordable housing should go over that period, so that we can really make sure that all of the participants in the system have some sense of where the whole thing's going, whether that be a housing support service or a private sector developer that's involved with us, or a community housing provider, or local government. We're working towards building a stronger and more capable social housing system. There's all kinds of aspects of this, including an independent review of the regulatory system for community housing, which will be really incredibly important. We're working on building a new partnership with local government. Some of you might know that I have a background in local government for part of my career, and there's a range of different perspectives that you get from local government around the housing market that are incredibly important. And to state the obvious, local governments are perhaps the people that understand best what's going on in the local street and community dynamic, who understand what's happening with the next block of land that might be becoming available for housing, who understand the particular pressures and dynamics of that community, whether that be the need for economic development activity and housing to support economic development in Ararat, or whether that be the need for better support for rough sleepers in the city of Port Phillip. Underpinning all of this is a real focus on sustainability and renewal within the public housing portfolio. A lot of the growth in social housing will come from the community housing sector, and I'll talk about that. But there's also a real effort underway at the moment to make sure that public housing is a core and sustainable part of the future for Victoria. And that's against a context where really public housing assets have been run down across Australia for 20 or 30 years, and we really need to correct that trajectory to get into a more sustainable pathway. So the big housing build and this policy reform agenda are being delivered by Homes Victoria, which is the new government agency. We manage the public housing system. We have an important role across the housing support and homelessness systems. We are the sector stewards and funders of social housing and community housing. And with the big housing build, we've also expanded our activity into the affordable housing market to really prompt market reaction and dynamism about growing supply and options in that more affordable end of the market. We have a very simple purpose, which is more homes for more Victorians. And it's important that that's more homes. It's not just the bricks and mortar, it's also the community and the supports and the environment in which people can actually build a stable long-term home. So it is a generational change, and it's a very exciting thing to be part of, and no doubt there'll be a bit of discussion about it over the coming few days. I just want to give a little bit more detail on the next slide about the big housing build. So I've talked about some of these factors already. There's a specific focus on housing for Victorians living with mental illness, and that follows the Royal Commission into the Victorian mental health system. There's a particular focus on Aboriginal self-determination. About 10% of all of the social dwellings being built will be delivered through partnerships with Aboriginal community controlled organisation, and ideally through ownership of Aboriginal community controlled organisations. Over the last 3 or 4 years, the Victorian government has transferred its Aboriginal housing assets into Aboriginal ownership, and this is a really core part of self-determination. We've talked about over 12,000 new homes right across Victoria. 25% of that investment will be in regional and rural Victoria, and that's playing a really important role already in boosting supply into markets that are experiencing some real affordability challenges. There's work going on gender equity in construction, because the statistics about construction sector gender equity are pretty poor, and we need to make sure that we're playing a significant role in combating that. There's work going on around energy efficiency. There's work going on about training and employment pathways into construction. And to put it perhaps in its most simple terms, the Victorian residential construction sector is, depending on the year, between about 65 and 80,000 new dwelling commencements a year. And over the next 3 or 4 years, we will be somewhere between 5 and 10% of the Victorian residential construction sector, either in projects that we're delivering ourselves or that we're funding. And if you think about it logically, that's important. I mean, if we start from the premise that it would be great for all jurisdictions in Victoria to get, in Australia, to get to 5% of their housing stock as social housing, which is a significant uplift from where we are now, then fairly obviously we need to be doing more than 5% for a number of years in order to get to that 5%. And so what that means is that if you're a housing builder or a developer or a constructor in Wangaratta or in Geelong or in inner city Melbourne, the big housing build and Homes Victoria are likely to be involved in somewhere between 5 and 10% of your work. And therefore, it's a really important part of the economic story of the construction sector as well. Next slide, thanks. So I want to give a little bit of an insight into where I think some of the policy directions are going, and also some policy gaps. So we are pretty well established on the policy directions on the left-hand side of this page. I've talked about Aboriginal self-determination. We've talked about integrated communities. And really that's at a site level, but also at a local government level, at a suburb level, and also Victoria-wide. And really what that means is social, affordable, private, supported disability, specialist disability accommodation, all mixed into a tenure-blind, inclusive, high-quality, successful local community. And no boundaries. I must admit, and this is a personal view perhaps rather than a government policy view, I loathe the hard boundaries that exist around some of our social housing, with fences and more or less signs up that say don't come on here. And what that means is that our renters, our tenants feel that sense of lack of participation in economic and social life. And that can be as simple as the fact that there are fewer retail outlets, fewer places to buy a litre of milk in some locations that we manage. But obviously it's also about social inclusion. I was on a forum the other night with some renters in a part of Melbourne that we're doing some work in. And one of the tenants, we were talking about building a new playground. And we were talking about building a new playground in such a way that it was going to attract children from all over the neighbourhood. And one of our renters, literally on the Zoom call, started crying. And she said, I just find the idea that other people would come onto this place, and that we would be part of their community and they would be part of our community, to be so exciting and so optimistic. So there's a lot of work to do there. We've talked about, or we will talk more about, design quality. It's really central to what we're doing at the moment. I've talked a little bit about housing first. There's not time this morning to go into a lot of detail about it, but we are seeing a significant shift in how we engage with the homelessness system and homelessness issues. And through the Homelessness to a Home program, or the program that was announced last Friday to house more families who've been in emergency accommodation through COVID, we're really putting in place a housing first response with significant supports around it. Tenant empowerment and enablement. This is something that is really important to us. We've learned a lot through COVID, and we've really seen, I think, the extent to which we have become disconnected from our communities and from the strength and capacity and power of those communities. And the most obvious example of that, perhaps, is the challenges that we encountered when the North Melbourne and Flemington communities went into hard lockdown due to COVID. And from that very difficult circumstance that I think we would all accept that it was very difficult, we're now seeing a shift into more work underway on tenant empowerment and enablement, recognising the strength of our communities and supporting tenants to grow and nurture those communities. We need a system that has diverse and responsive housing providers. There are many different housing needs in Victoria. There are many different cohorts, whether that be older women or younger single men, whether that be people experiencing mental illness, people living with a disability, people living in regional Victoria, people who are perhaps looking for an affordable housing property in inner Melbourne. So we need a system that has a large number of highly responsive, highly engaged housing providers and a real diversity of perspectives between those housing providers. We already have had some of that in the Victorian context, but through the big housing build, we're really looking forward to turbocharging that work. Finally, there is a big need at the moment for better management of complex tenancies and illegal behaviour. This is part actually of the Housing First story. It's part of the role of social housing in relation to tenant support, but we have a lot of challenges at the moment right across the rental market, whether that be in the private sector or in the social housing sector or in the affordable housing sector, with tenancies that are not going well and real difficulties for neighbours, and how to manage that in a way that recognises the rights of all parties and that makes sure that people get the support they need when they need it. And so there's lots more to do on that front. Notwithstanding a lot of progress on all of those fronts, there are really very significant policy gaps still at play at the moment. The most obvious of this is, where is the Australian government and where is Commonwealth state collaboration? There have been times in our history, going back for decades, perhaps to the post-war era, where the Australian government has played a central and important role in providing affordable housing and in supporting the growth of social and affordable housing. And that role is incredibly important. You sometimes hear people say that there is no role for the Australian government in social housing, which I don't know, is just historically incorrect. The other challenge around this is there are lots of interface issues between the Commonwealth and the states on social and affordable housing. And there's very little opportunity at the moment to have that discussion, to have that debate. Some of that is at the macro policy level, like, I don't know, planning policies and land release and issues like that. But some of it is at the micro level about the administration of social security payments, for example. If you went out and talked to people sleeping rough on the streets of Melbourne in 2019, which the team did, about 50% of people sleeping rough on the streets of Melbourne have an active job search requirement under the social security system, which means that I can't remember the exact number. Is it 20 jobs a fortnight that people were expected to search for and apply for while they were sleeping rough? And of course, if you don't apply for those jobs, then you fall out of the social security payment system. And as we know, if you fall out of the social security payment system, which is very easy to do these days because there are lots of complex administration and rules around proof of identity and proof of compliance and ongoing engagement that many people find challenging. If you fall out of that system and end up in a world where you're on zero payment, which a significant proportion of people in Victoria are, then obviously it's very, very difficult to get into the housing market. On a completely different lens, there's a bunch of work that we need to do that we're really only just kind of starting around construction for whole of life cost and about reducing construction costs through modularization and prefab. On the whole of life costs, we've recently done created a partnership, which I'll talk about a little bit more, the Building Communities Partnership, which has a structure built into it that really is optimized for whole of life costs. But it's fairly infrequently done, and this is true for both ourselves, but also the housing market more generally. The rise of build to rent is creating some different incentives in the system around this that might change this dynamic, but there is a lot of work to be done in this area. And look, I'm incredibly optimistic about the role of modularization and effectively prefabrication or componentization of housing. I think we can use that to both get significant design improvements and get improvements in cost structure. Next slide, thanks. So I'll just quickly talk about a couple of the specific projects that we're involved in. I talked before about the $2 billion of construction activity, but I want to give a little bit of an insight into a few of these specific programs so that you get a sense of how we're doing the work on the ground. Next slide, thanks. And really, the most important message, I think, is that different sites, different locations, different parts of Victoria, different site contexts, different partnership contexts mean different delivery models and different expectations and relationships. And sometimes you hear in housing policy this kind of sense that there's a silver bullet, that there's a single new delivery model to save them all, or that there is a single way of working that should be the future. And I think what we're really doing at the moment is demonstrating that across the 430 sites, sorry, that was my dog in the background, across the 430 sites that we're currently building on, there are about 250 different delivery models in place, and that is as it should be. An important part of this is our commitment to design excellence and to working collaboratively with the Office of the Victorian Government Architect to make sure that we're embedding design excellence right across the program. Next slide, thanks. So I won't go through these in any detail, but we have a well-developed sense of design principles, and we're trying really hard to aspire to those design principles in every project. And we're really engaging with the architectural community with the hope and the expectation that we will together get better and better at the design outcomes from our projects. Next slide, thanks. So one of the models that we currently have underway and is, we call it the ground lease model, perhaps a slightly technical way of describing it. But this is a project that is delivering something north of 1,100 new homes across 3 sites in Melbourne, in Flemington, Brighton and Prahran. And it's a consortium that is going to operate for 40 years. At its core, it has a not-for-profit entity called Building Communities, which is really very closely connected in a corporate sense to Community Housing Victoria Limited, which is one of the not-for-profit community housing providers. And it's got funding from the private sector, it's got building and construction work, it's got support from the National Housing Finance and Infrastructure Corporation to create a structure that is going to build, design and operate social, affordable and market rental properties for a period of 40 years. So it's built to rent as well as affordable as well as social. And at the end of 40 years, we get a high quality asset returned to us as a Victorian government asset, and then we can make some decisions about what we do with it at that time. Next slide, thanks. And these will start to feel a little bit kind of random now because we're jumping around a bit just to give a sense of the kind of work we have underway. In North Richmond is the largest single site that Homes Victoria owns and manages. And we are absolutely determined to see economic, social and community revitalisation of this neighbourhood. There's a plan under development now, a master plan, which will have better connectivity, better open space, an injection of mixed use and new physical infrastructure, both housing and non-housing, into these really critical locations to improve safety and to normalise and integrate North Richmond into the wider metropolitan landscape. Next slide, thanks. There's a specific project underway with Kirsten Thompson as the architect, which is really the first mover on this implementing the master plan. And this is a site on Elizabeth Street. We're really excited about it. It's 144 new homes. 50% of those will be social, 50% affordable, a mixture of 1, 2 and 3 bedroom properties, a lot of work on accessibility, a lot of work on environmental design and sustainability. And really the first step in revitalising the physical infrastructure of North Richmond. Next slide, thanks. We're also well underway. We'll be on site and constructing within about 3 or 4 weeks on this site in Bill Street, Hawthorn. This is a smaller location, a great little site in the middle of Hawthorn. Sometimes people say, well, why do you need social housing in Hawthorn? We need social housing in every suburb in Victoria. We need social housing in every community in Victoria. And it's a really exciting project. We're really looking forward to it. And Hayball were the architects on that site, and they've done some great design. Next slide, thanks. We're also working closely with the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning and the Victorian Government Architect around the Future Homes project. And we're working in Braybrook on a site on Ballarat Road with Leanne and again with Kirsten Thompson to implement one of the outcomes of the design competition that was run for Future Homes. Next slide, thanks. So across all of this, whether that be in regional Victoria, we're doing work in Ballarat and Bendigo and Benalla and other locations, whether it be in metropolitan Melbourne, whether it be in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, we're really trying to build a multidisciplinary design and master planning team. That's a new capability for us. We haven't had that in the past, effectively because there's been so little development activity underway. We're engaging proactively with OVGA. We really want that external review and scrutiny and that peer review that's such an important part of the Victorian Design Review panel. And we really want to push the boundaries, and the Future Homes project is perhaps just the first of many opportunities for us to push the boundaries, particularly around that idea of high quality design that's also affordable, low cost construction. Next slide, thanks. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today. I hope that this has been exciting. It's not necessarily a straightforward thing to do to try and be engaging across this kind of platform. I hope that you have a great 3 days. I really hope that the transformation underway in Victoria gives all of you a sense of optimism and purpose about the discussion that you're having, whether that be from a wider Australian context. There are great things happening in some other states and territories, but I think as a nation, we need to do more in relation to social and affordable housing. or whether that be an international perspective, and there's things going on here that are possible to learn from, and vice versa, that there are things that we're doing that we need to learn from and improve on from overseas. Speaking to my Victorian and Australian colleagues now for a moment, can I say that I think we have within our grasp a very significant shift in the policy landscape driven by the decisions of the Victorian government. Perhaps more now than at any time in the last 3 decades or more. We need your voices, your engagement to continue to push us to do more and better, and to hold us up to our own aspirations and to the commitments that the government has made, that the Premier, the Minister have made, and to really keep us honest in that discussion. We need to break down some of the old and stale debates, because really we need 15 years or more of reform and delivery at the scale that's currently underway to achieve anything approximating success. And this won't happen without consistent cross-sector, whole of community engagement, particularly from the civic society that's represented in this conference that Alan and his team have engaged. Thank you very much for having me today, and I hope you have an enjoyable and engaging conference experience. I'm certainly looking forward to hearing how the conversation unfolds across the 2021 Housing Symposium.
Alan, we're not hearing you. Sorry, can you hear me? We're not hearing you. I think you're on mute.
I'm here.
Fabulous. We might need to have you say that again.
We're just about to jump across to New York, which I think shows you the diversity of where we're speaking from across the 3 days. But look, I just want to thank Ben for starting the symposium by reinforcing that housing is a critical foundation of a person's life. And I think it appropriately sets the tone for the next 3 days of talks and symposium and seminars and panel sessions. I think highlighting that there's 53,000 applicants for social housing and a predicted population growth of 11.2 million by 2056 highlights the scale of the challenge ahead. But I think importantly, Ben's given us a lot of optimism for the shape of things to come for social and affordable housing. So look, it is 9:30. We've got Professor Saskia Sassen now live from New York. So please join us with Michele Acuto from the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning, who'll be hosting that talk. And thanks, Ben.